Well, good
Okay.
evening, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Randy Wolf, current director of the program in nutrition. It is wonderful to see so many students, alumni, colleagues, friends, and members of Isabel's family. As you know, Isabel Contento is our distinguished Mary Schwartz Rose Professor of Nutrition Education. She epitomizes Dr. Rose's ideals by linking theory with research and practice. For me, Isabel's been a mentor and colleague for the past 2 decades. I've worked side by side with her in Thorndike Hall and learned so much from her about what it takes to be a good researcher and teacher, and also what it means to deeply love your work and to love helping students. It's clear from so many that showed up tonight that Isabel hasn't just touched my life, but countless other lives along her personal and professional journey. Come September 2021, I know we will deeply miss Isabel, but we'll do everything possible to continue building on the strong foundation created by Drs. Mary Schwartz Rose, Joan Gussow, and Isabel Contento to grow and maintain a program that they'll be proud of for years to come. I'm going to turn it over now to Pam, who's going to say a few words about tonight's event and about our spring event.
And hi, everyone. I'm Pam Cook. And as with Randy, Isabel has been a mentor and a close colleague for almost 3 decades, which is crazy. Isabel has had a measurable influence. She has just about single-handedly changed and expanded the definition of nutrition education, as well as the course of the field, so that nutrition education is effective at changing behaviors because it enhances motivation, facilitates action, and creates supportive environments. In addition to her professional influence and accomplishment, she has lived a very interesting life, and she has traveled to or lived in almost every corner of the planet. Anyone who knows Isabel knows she has stories from her life that are riveting, and those experiences make her who she is today. When Isabel suggested this event in which she would share her life, everyone on the program and nutrition faculty immediately shouted, "Yes, that would be amazing." So in true Isabel fashion, she dove into preparing for this with every ounce of her being. Randy and I got a sneak preview, and you are all in for a real treat. This event focuses on the personal side of Isabel's life. We are planning a conference in spring 2021 as a tribute to Isabel's professional life. So watch for more information about this conference, and we really hope you will all attend. And now, without further delay, I'm turning it over to Isabel for An Evening with Isabel, Stories from a Life.
Well, with that kind of introduction, it's amazing. I just want to say I'm really, really very excited to see so many of you. So much as we have disliked living a virtual life, for this occasion has been nice because we've been able to have so many of you participate. As I look at all of you, we've scanned back and forth. I can tell personal stories with every single one of you. And so it feels like a homecoming. I mean, it's like a celebration of not just me, but of course of the whole program and of all of us. That's how I feel. And most of you have seen me in my Teachers College context. So I thought, but I got here through a rather circuitous and a maverick sort of route. I'm a career changer, so to speak. And so I got into nutrition later in my life. And I thought it would be kind of fun to share with you how I got here and how some of my experiences have influenced me personally and professionally. So a part of it is not going to be about nutrition yet, because that kind of comes later. When I was in Russia a couple of years ago, I bought a set of Russian dolls. And it occurs to me that our lives are like that, a series of Russian dolls with a layer upon layer, so that whoever we are now still incorporates so many of the persons that we were. So I decided that I would use this as my sort of framework for this evening. And so I will talk about different aspects of my life. Now, of course, as we go through life, so many people contribute to who we are. And so many I've been grateful for all those who have contributed to who I am. And that includes so many of you. Really, really you have. And so I feel very, very grateful. Now, before I get into, I'm going to show some slides. Before I get into that, I thought I would just provide a little context. First, as I said, this is all going to be very personal this whole evening. I grew up in a missionary household. So what are missionaries? Well, anybody with a mission, which means that probably applies to half of us on here today. But in their case, their mission was to train Christian leaders in universities and high schools, first in China, and then it was in Vietnam and in Philippines. We start off like a set of Russian dolls. And I'm going to start with the first one. So the early years were in China. And of course, you have to have a few baby pictures, right? And because of the fact that my parents were worked with university students, I sort of got dragged around with them and participated in whatever they did. So I grew up speaking Chinese. In fact, it was my first language. And then we ate Chinese food. We lived in a Chinese household. And then my parents were teaching in Northwest University, which is in the town of Xi'an. And it's become quite a tourist spot because they discovered all these terracotta soldiers of Emperor Qin. And of course, he unified China, and this is 2,000 years ago. And of course, that's why we call the country China or China. My mother was a qualified teacher, so so I was homeschooled, and I am eternally grateful for that. And I really enjoyed my life in China, but there was always war was going on, and led by Chiang Kai-shek, by Mao Zedong on one side, looking for a communist revolution, people's war, and Chiang Kai-shek was a nationalist. And of course, they sort of collaborated during the Japanese occupation of China. But when the war was over, they resumed the civil war. And in 1949, Mao Zedong led his troops in triumph into Beijing. In my city, it was a little less dramatic.
No, we can eat. We could eat.
No, you wait.
I hear somebody, I'm not sure who. Anyway, in the new China, things were different. And classes stopped. University professors, students, and everybody participated in re-education programs to wash the brain of capitalist ideas. But fear descended on the communities because if you said things that were politically incorrect, you were likely to disappear and also end up in a re-education camp somewhere. And I guess the people in Hong Kong are beginning to experience that as well. So it was really dangerous for students like this to be seen with my parents. And I also lost all my friends. The only people was that this woman worked with us and her daughter, they both lived with us. And she really wanted a picture of us before we left. So this is how I looked just before I left China. And when we went to Hong Kong, I will just report that for several years, I would have nightmares about coming to the border of Hong Kong where there was a river and a bridge and not being able to get over it. But as it turns out, we did get to Hong Kong. And as I looked at this picture of myself, I just can't believe that's the same person, but I was 3 months later. Also interesting is that I went to school for the first time in Hong Kong and discovered that classrooms have practices and hidden rules that I knew nothing about. So at the end of my first semester there, I was number 33. I ranked 33 out of a class of 33. So that means I had to do a bit of learning. Well, Hong Kong was temporary, so my parents went to Singapore. At that time, Singapore was a British colony. And so I went to a local school. And most schools were taught in English, even though most of my classmates, as you can see, were Chinese. And Miss Oliver, our class teacher, or there's me, our class teacher was really the only white person in the school. Well, we had sports of a kind, and so there I am. And I went to an after school for science classes, and we did have Girl Scouts. And most people finish school at the end of at age 16. But if you want to go to university, you went to a different school. And I went to Anglo-Chinese school, a competitor Raffles school that Ian Ung, one of our graduates, went to. At that time, you have to choose between sciences and the humanities. You couldn't do both. So I chose the sciences. And, you know, typical teenagers, we did our work very seriously, but we also had parties, and this was an outing of my classmates, the science classmates. And now we did not have football, baseball, cheerleaders, and all that. Everybody was very, very serious. Now, while all of this was going on, in fact, there was a good deal of unrest occurring as well. I was there while Indochina, Dien Bien Phu, and all those battles were being fought. And what really happened was that Japan's successful conquest of all these Southeast Asia countries changed people's perspectives. The fact that an Asian power had defeated European powers changed their feeling that, you know, they could be powerful as well. So when the colonialists all returned to their colonies, there was a call for independence. So, well, so what kind of country would we like? So there were different visions of governance for a post-colonial era. And the two main contestants were a communist Marxist one and a national socialist one. Singapore too had its unrest. And there were strikes, and this is when all the gas stations went on strike. So that means you know, transportation came to a stop. And whereas the history is really very complicated, to shorten it would say that the British decided it would give Singapore independence, and that there was sort of a competition to a certain extent between Mr. Lim on the left here, who was more of a Marxist communist, and Lee Kuan Yew, who was more of a national socialist. And eventually what happened was that the People's Action Party under Lee Kuan Yew, who were speaking there, and who is here, that they won 42, I think, 45 seats out of the 51 in the new legislature. And what they called for was a united, independent, democratic, non-communist and socialist Malaysia by peaceful and democratic means. So, so what are some of my thoughts on this? So let me just say that on the personal side, despite the fighting and the uncertainty, my parents were very resilient. They practical problem solvers who had a lot of common sense. So I always felt safe. And as I was the only child, I learned to be very independent. In fact, my parents expected me to be independent, to be matter of fact, and to solve problems as they came up. And although I was the only white kid I knew all through my teenage, that I knew growing up, I never really felt different. Especially in Singapore, I didn't feel different, except the period right after the Communist Party in China. Okay, so how does it apply to me? Well, as high school students, we had intense discussions about whether it was better to have self-government, even if it turned out not to be so good, or to stay with colonial government, which was relatively benign and seemed to be functioning well. Of course, I became passionately interested in understanding different governance systems, not politics so much, but different governance systems. And so I bring that perspective when I look at literature about foods and nutrition. Now, living in a multicultural country also made me very aware of the fact of the importance of really creating a sense of community and providing equity for all. A final observation before we leave Asia. My parents then, after Singapore, went to Vietnam and were there all during what we call the Vietnam War. And I would visit them fairly frequently, a month at a time. And I noticed that America's narrative about its involvement in events overseas tends to be very self-involved, as if there were no other nations involved and with agency and agendas of their own. From living there during this era, it seems to me that the fighting was really about conflicting visions about what the governance should be. So China and Vietnam selected the communist one, whereas Marxist communist, whereas Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia went for a national socialist government. Well, of course, they've all morphed into something very different these days. So, so here I am, having graduated from high school. So now it's time for college. Where to go? Because of the fact that this was a British colony, my education was British, my mother had taught me using British textbooks, of course, I was going to go to Britain, to a British university, and I selected the University of Edinburgh. How should I go? By ship or plane? Of course not. My parents were very adventuresome. They had gone Trans-Siberian Railway and they had taken motorcycle trips. So they decided that what we should do is we should get a Land Rover, which they bought actually as a used Land Rover from the British military. So off we went. And in the 1,200 miles through all of northern India, we did all the tourist things, of course. You know, went to temples, to mosques, and museums. But my parents also had a very big network of missionaries and who were in education. They had schools, health clinics, community projects. So we learned a lot about the country through that, as well as we went to government offices. But I do want to tell you about a couple of very personal episodes. We decided that we would take a trip to Nepal, and the way to get there was to take a bus. So we got on this rickety bus and went up there. Now, during this time, I actually kept a journal, which I found recently. So let me just read a couple of sentences from that. The road zigzagged up the mountain. The hairpin bends were numerous, and often the bus had to back up to get around the bend. The drops from the roads were also sheer drops, so that the view obtained was like that from an airplane, simply marvelous. The drive was extremely hair-raising, and sometimes we thought that we would go over the edge as the mountain climbed along the road. The mountain dropped several thousand feet below the road. Well, guess what? A wheel came off of the bus. And in fact, we were cantilevered over the 2,000 foot drop. Well, obviously we survived. Oh, I wouldn't be here to tell the tale. So, okay, we get back on our Land Rover and go some more. So I'll tell you another sort of hair-raising story on that trip, which is that we were now in Pakistan. And Pakistan, I went to my journal. I'm impressed that I wrote such detailed journal. Most of Pakistan would be a gigantic desert before irrigation from the river Indus. It was terribly hot. The temperature was about 110 degrees in the shade, and we in the car were not in the shade. Everything was hot, everywhere, all the time. Even the night was only 1 or 2 degrees cooler. The air was hot. The car was hot. The water for bathing was hot. The fans blew hot air in the rooms in the guest houses that we stayed in. And even my pajamas were hot to the touch. For 4 days, we were hot and sweaty, dirty all day. And this is supposed to be one of the hottest places in Asia. Just to keep going, so we ended up moving along. But as we did so, it says that we found ourselves, the landscape stretched flat, yellow, stony, barren, and dry as far as the eye could see. No trees or grass. The monotony, to break the monotony. And so fear took hold of me. What if the car broke down and we got stranded here, far from help? Well, guess what happened? That's exactly what happened. The car broke down. And in fact, the Land Rover had given us endless trouble. And it was often difficult to get it started. So I really thought that we were going to die there. Now, we had 10 gallons of water. We had also food on our car. And we knew that the train went by once a week. So maybe we could flag down the train. So this was the no man's land of about 100 miles between Iran and Pakistan. But there again, we eventually got the car going, or we would have been in trouble. So during all of this time, how we stayed was we often stayed in rest houses. These were built by the British in both Pakistan and India. Remember, it was all one country. When the British were there, and they had district officers who would sort of travel around the district, and they would stay there. Very nice places, very simple. Other times we actually slept in the Land Rover. We had this platform that we put there, and it looks like that day I'm cooking there, and all our food is sort of on the car. In Iran, this was an occasion where we were looking for a hotel, and this young man said, "Well, why don't you come and stay with us?" So it was quite an adventure. So here we are, lots of different places as we go marching through all these different countries. Okay, taking the road less traveled, we finally arrive at the University of Edinburgh, founded in 1582. Now, I don't have time to spend much, to talk about it very much, but to say that I lived in George Square, which is quite famous, and here are some of my roommates. And by my 4th year there, I had a scooter that I was very proud of. So this is a building I did biochemistry labs that I did my work in. And once, now, of course, I wanted, the degree was a 3-year degree, which was a fairly large class, but you could be invited to stay on for an honors year, which I did. And this is my graduating class. When I went to Scotland, I, of course, discovered that I had relatives. And so here I was grateful that my grandmother and 2 aunts came to my graduation. So I got to know my cousins and my uncles, and one of my cousins in Australia is on the call today. So before I leave travel, having got the travel bug, I'm going to just tell you a couple more trips that I took. The fact that I had spent so much time in Asia meant, though, that I didn't really understand sort of the classic history as much. So I went on a trip to Egypt and Greece. And here we are in Luxor in Egypt. And I can just tell you these temples and the size of them makes the Parthenon in Athens seem like a small building. I also went to southern Spain because I wanted to understand the relationship, the collaboration between Christians and Muslims during the Golden Age. To prepare for that, I actually attended some sessions on Islam, read the Quran, and also the books about Muhammad. Then we more recently went to Australia, Austria, and Czech Republic. I discovered that there was a group called the Habsburgs, and that this dynasty ran Central and Eastern Europe for 700 years. How come I never heard of them? And the last one started the First World War, and that's why he was the last one. The Czech Republic, of course, was very much central to the Second World War, which led me to read about Hitler and his life and how he got into power. And as a result of all of this, it's important because then you really truly understand Europe. More recently, my husband and I took this trip to Trans-Siberian Railway to understand the Russian Revolution. So, so what did I learn from all of these travels? Well, there's certainly something to be said for taking the route less traveled, even if it takes longer. It was great fun to be with my parents on this adventure, to see their enthusiasm about everything and the fact that they engaged with people and things everywhere they went. So it certainly taught me to go with the flow. You ate whatever food was available or what was offered to you. And of course, and where you slept and where you stayed. And you take care of problems as they come up. On the professional side, it was clear that both access to food and education were important, because I certainly saw some places that provided education, such as in schools, and other places that provided foods but not education. I saw what it was like to live in extreme poverty, but also the resilience and the competence with which people handled their situations. It was also very clear that people everywhere wanted to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter what their situation was. And it certainly gave me a global perspective, so that I still feel that way every time I read about food systems, poverty, cultures, population. I see it in a global context. And of course, also because of the fact that that I experienced everything, it means that when we talk about climate change or food justice, it helps me concretize these very abstract concepts. For example, we talk about food justice. I can imagine the farmers in India and in Turkey and elsewhere, and how it would affect them. And when I read the story about Walmart wanting to start as as mega stores in India, I immediately can imagine the hundreds of small shopkeepers who would be put out of their livelihoods if they moved in. So now, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, maybe being there is worth 1,000 pictures. Now, it doesn't mean it has to be travel to exotic places as I did. But even if you read about food banks, for example, but if you actually volunteer there and you're there, you really truly understand it, what it's like. So I think being present is so important. And not only that, of course, it certainly instilled in me a love of history. And I have to tell you, I almost majored in history, and I subscribed to a couple of history magazines. And I experienced hundreds of acts of kindness to us, which made me very positive about people, local people everywhere. On a really personal level, of course, it was nice to see a grandmother, my uncles and aunts, and of course, the Scottish scenery is not to be beat. Highly recommended to all of you. So maybe we can go back to some of my slides. So my travels to college. Okay, what next? Well, I went to Berkeley next. And of course, I didn't fly there. I took a ship to New York and a Greyhound bus across country to Berkeley. So here I was in Edinburgh. This is what I look like. And here's what I looked like when I first started out in Berkeley. And I actually auditioned for and got into, there I am, the Oakland Symphony Chorus. That was directed by Gerhard Samuel, who went on to more large orchestras. So here I am. So let's see. So what happened? How did I get there? Well, a number of things happened, but let me talk about one of them, which is the free speech movement, which I think a number of people have heard about. So this is Berkeley Say Their Gate. A number of students from Berkeley had gone to the South during the summer and worked in the civil rights movement, and registering voters and also fighting Jim Crow laws. When they came back to Berkeley, they became active in the various the civil rights movements in Oakland and San Francisco. So they put up some tables to recruit for protests and activities off campus. And the university said, no, 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 you can't do that. The reason being that there was something called in locus parentis, which is that the colleges were in place of your parents. So it's like a little bubble around the campus. And if students got into trouble, then it was the campus police who dealt with them and whatever penalties that there were. And so they said, no, you cannot use the campus to launch activities off campus. So that led them to disagree. And so the police came, and as you can see here, they arrested the guys who had the tables out. And there are the two police. Before long, the students all surrounded it and wouldn't let it go anywhere. And eventually people got up and made speeches, and it went on and on. Of course, eventually, the students had to go to the bathroom and they had to eat. So they arrested them and took them away. But then it morphed into this big protest about, well, every grievance that students had about the university, in particular that it seemed very impersonal. And so this person, Mario Savio, got on top of the roof of the car. He was not a big leader or anything, but he said this thing that now is, you can find it on Google even. There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. You've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels and upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. So what was I doing during all this time? Well, I was in the lab doing my doctoral dissertation. But my professor was had been a member of the Communist Party. In fact, he had worked full-time being the leader of the Youth Communist Movement. And so at this point, though, he had left the Communist Party, but he worked behind the scenes with all the other faculty to eventually get the faculty senate to vote in favor of the students' demands. I was happy to have seen him a couple of years ago. He was 95. Still driving, had a blog, and was still politically active. And I was rather distressed very recently to discover he suddenly passed away. Now, there was another movement going on at the same time, which is the Black Panther Party, and founded by Bobby Seale and Huey Newton. And they were protesting, no big surprise, police brutality against Black people, especially Black men. Now, they sort of carried guns and looked and had sort of their berets and leather jackets, but in fact, they never hurt anybody. They never killed anybody. I became interested because I was interested in this person, Kathleen Cleaver. Eldridge Cleaver had been put in jail. When he came out, he wrote a book and made him quite a celebrity. And the two of them met in some kind of an event. It was love at first sight. Now, she was a very charismatic speaker. And so I became a groupie of her. So wherever she went, I would speak. I would follow her to speak. Here they are, having spoken at Berkeley. I got a recent picture of her, and it turns out that she actually went to Barnard College for her first year before she dropped out. And then eventually she and Eldridge separated. She went back to school, went to Yale Law School, and is now a faculty member at Emory. And apparently she's writing a book about all of this. And so keep your eyes open. The other person that was very important was Angela Davis. And there was a huge article about her in the New York Times a couple weeks ago. So, okay, all these other movements were going on as well. The counterculture and Vietnam. So what were some of my thoughts about this? And I won't spend too much time on it because obviously anybody who lived through it, it changed them. It certainly was very liberating generally and to me personally. And it changed society for good or ill. Some people thought it was for ill. Of course, it was also a bit overwhelming for me. I had just come to the United States and all of this was happening. And it was eye-opening about some of the injustices that were occurring in this country, particularly for Black people. I think today's movement has very broad support, and I find it I think it's fundamentally very constructive and hopeful. One of the things that did come out of that is that I decided that I did not want to work in a lab. Much as I admire people who do so, I didn't want to do so. I wanted to be more relevant and more directly involving with people. So that led me to my next place, which was a life-transforming experience. And this was because, I said the universities felt that it was too impersonal. So a lot of universities were trying to solve that problem. The University of Redlands was one of them. Now, Redlands is a beautiful, beautiful town in Southern California. A person named Johnson had just retired from IBM. So they thought that they could start a college, Johnson College, that would focus on international business. And now by then they realized that, corporations had to be more sensitive to its workers and more innovative. So if this was a slightly innovative college, that would be fine. But they did not vet the person that they hired as well as they should have, because the person they hired, Press McCoy, had been with the Danforth Foundation, and he had led the Central States College Association. And he had his ideas of what an ideal college would be. And here was his opportunity to implement it. It was to create an intentional learning community. Students are to be the creators of their own educational path. Learning is a negotiated experience. Every person is of worth. Feelings do not detract from learning. They're essential to learning. And it was to be an egalitarian pace. And it was understanding one's own and other cultures and social political context is essential. His own PhD was in political science. So even though some faculty have gone there a year before to plan this college, including Dr. John Watt, who's on this call, he decided we would start all over again. So he took all the students, 182 new students, 17 new faculty, administrators. We went up to a conference center for 10 days. We had a retreat. What were we doing in this retreat? Well, he hired a bunch of people who were good leaders for group therapy, basically, to build self and other awareness, interpersonal communication through encounter groups. And the purpose was to create this total community by focusing on belonging and becoming, and also to create task-oriented experience to help us to develop this curriculum. So Johnson was part of an experimental college, part of a movement. And we hosted a conference of 94 institutions, and I chaired it. I was in my most adamant, feminist, anti-establishment mode at that time. And I insisted that of the three people from each institution, one had to be a student and one had to be a person of color if possible. So we had a wonderful conference and we all learned a lot. So at Johnson, of course, we had lots of discussions about education, about the relationship between feeling and thinking, social activism, etc. And so here we are, the Johnson experience. I'm obviously animated about some issue, which I'm not sure what it was, but here are some of my colleagues. And so now what about courses? Well, we did create courses. So faculty could post courses. I see my name there, and I see that there are two courses posted. Students could request courses, and students could propose courses. So let me just say that the faculty that Press McCoy hired were really very noted researchers or scholars in their field. They'd also been selected as being the best teacher of the year at their institutions. And I was totally intimidated. I came just from my PhD with very little teaching experience. But I guess that's why Johnson was good for me. The students were also very good. He used his network to, these students were, well, they were just very good. The whole idea was that we were co-learners, except after a while, one of the students, I remember, said, wait a minute, we're doing the paying. You're doing the receiving of the money that we pay. This is not we're not equal. We're not co-learners. We expect you to provide expertise and to provide support. And so we realize that nursing it's a negotiated experience, but that we as faculty had something to offer. So this is what happened in courses. You would propose a course, and after the first 1 or 2 weeks, you sort of settled on this. This is each student wrote a contract, and here the person is saying, there are 3 reasons for which I'm taking this class. The first being definitely the most important. So she gives the reasons why she's taking the course. Therefore, I agree to do the following. Expectations of the faculty, 1, 2, 3, 4. Criteria for evaluation, 1, 2, 3. And so at the end of the semester, the faculty member wrote an evaluation based mostly on these criteria. I can just tell you, writing these evaluations for every student took a very long time. Okay, graduation was also negotiated by contract. The student created the contract, was quite a document, thoughtful document, was negotiated with the faculty sponsor and approved by the graduation contract committee, which had a student representative. And when you went to the committee, you could bring an advocate with you. But the contract still had to demonstrate sufficient breadth, sufficient depth, relevance to your goals, and had to include a cross-cultural experience. Now, the community also decided to use the Quaker method of making decisions, which was, we had community meetings. Everybody got to have their say. But then you had great discussions. As you can see, this person is discussing and everybody's very thoughtfully listening to the person. Here's another student. Here was a faculty member, another faculty member. But then at the end, if you had items to agree to make a decision about, it was by consensus. Consensus did not mean that you had to agree with it. You just had to say you could live with it. So, okay. So what was I doing during all this time? Well, Press McCoy, who hired me to teach courses in environmental issues. This is 1970. 1969, he felt there was not enough attention to environmental issues. Now, I had taken plenty of botany and zoology, etc., except the last few years, of course, was more in the lab. So I went in there in my usual fashion. I studied up, ecology, and I actually, we did animals and plants and ecosystems and how they function. I took them on field trips, etc. Now I want to tell you one story about the organic garden that we had. So one day, a couple of policemen showed up at the college and said, "Who sponsors the garden?" And I said, "That's me." They said, "Well, we found some marijuana plants in the garden. And that means we need to find out who planted them because they need to be arrested." Now, remember free speech movement? That means now campuses are subject to local, state, and federal laws. Oh, I couldn't do that. So what to do? Of course, we had a community meeting. So I proposed, and after a lot of discussion, we all agreed. So I went to the police and I said, there are 282 students in the college. Any one of them could have had access to this college. So why don't I give you the names of all 282, and you can interview each one of them separately to see who you think was guilty. And for that matter, it was an open campus, and it could have been someone from the community who actually planted it. And by that time, the police said, "Oh, forget it." And so by then they had pulled out the plants anyway. And by then, I'm sure they were driving by daily to see that there were no plants in there. Okay, now another important part of this was that my partner there of the time and I wrote a grant to the college to go on a world tour to study environmental quality. Nothing like being grand, which we did. We went on all these different countries. And I recently found the report that I made. Actually, I was quite impressed. It was much more thoughtful and factual and up to date than I thought. So anyway, we talked to faculty members, we went to government planning offices, to population centers, to farms. We went to all sorts of places, at the end of which we created this course called Earth, Fire, Air, Fire, and Water. Earth being about agriculture, air about pollution, fire being about energy, and water about water. Just to move along some more, which is that I, of course, taught Introduction to Nutrition and another one about critical issues in nutrition, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And I found Society for Nutrition Education by then. I became active. So I want to tell you a little bit of story about this Introduction to Nutrition. I was going to take a Piaget constructivist approach, and this was early in the Johnston experience. So I had ordered a textbook, but the students didn't seem to want to dive into a textbook of nutrition. So I said, so what do you want to do? They said, well, the best thing to do was each student would take a different diet, eating plan. Macrobiotics was big at the time, and they would all eat this diet. And after a period of time, they would see how they felt. And from that, they would know what was the best way to eat. So I said, well, that's sort of like a good research design, but it's going to take a long time. And they said, no, that was what they were going to do. So we did that. They went on a fast first, and then they went talking about they talked about their diets every time we got together. After about 2 weeks, I said, I'm a little bored with what we're talking about. So if you want to, you could turn this into a student-led course. I don't want to come anymore, but you can sort of continue meeting to the end of the semester, and you can write an evaluation about what you learned. That would be fine with me. At which time I said, no, we want to learn nutrition. So out came the textbook. And so I learned that this is a negotiated experience. We also did some cooking, and we had some interesting experiences in the little house I had, some disasters, etc. Anyway, to add another layer to this, a colleague of mine who was a political scientist and very interested in agriculture, especially agriculture, well, in African countries, but also in the United States, she proposed that we offer a course called The Politics of Food. So I said, oh, okay. Diet for a Small Planet was coming about. Food for People, Not for Profit. Thank you, Pam, for a photograph of this book. I couldn't find it. Well, mine's back in my office. I went to see the Center for Public Interest, Michael Jacobson. And he was initiating something called Food Day. And when he heard that I was from Southern California, he got quite excited. He had an advisory board, and he said, would I like to be on it? And would I do some activities when I went back to California? So as I said, I went to see all these different organizations that had to do with food. And so I went back to California and did indeed do some activities. Now, just to add another layer, which was that I was also in was very much influenced by all these feminist writers, and got some training on how to run women's support groups. And we had one that was very good and lasted a long time. I'm still friends with a number of them, one of whom is in New York City. And to point out that, well, the one most important to me was The Feminine Mystique. Just to point out that Angela Davis wrote a book even back then about how the women's movement should not be a white middle class movement, but should take into account race and class and people of color. So the Johnston experience, and here was me about ready to leave Johnston College. As I said, it's beautiful. And I was very proud of my Z car that I had to part with when I came to New York City. So, okay. So what's and we all get together once every 5 years. And it's called the Johnston Renewal. And so why is it called the Johnston Renewal? So let me just say a few words about Johnston. So why do we come back every 5 years? Some of you, my colleagues, have heard me talk about it. Well, yes, it taught me about the student initiative and negotiated learning. Yes, it was about thinking and feeling and education. And yes, it It recognized the importance of cultural competence and social justice. But what was truly transformative for everyone, and I should say as an aside, at the last one, my husband muttered to me when I was sitting there, he says, "This is beginning to sound like a cult." And at that point, I talked to my friends, some of you can see, John and Ann Watt, who are my colleagues from way back then, and we chatted about it. And at the end of which we realized, what it really was, that what we experienced was that everyone's voice was heard. Everyone, at community meetings, at every meeting, every voice was heard. There was unconditional positive regard and acceptance of people. This was accompanied by mutual respect and responsibility. And we had honest conversations, not always easy, including about diversity and inclusion. So it's called a renewal because it's for us to remind us of these values and to be renewed in them each time we go back there. And of course, on the practical side, it gave me some skills in teaching, and in particular, working with groups. And in particular, it literally created my career in nutrition. So that leads me to then back to where we were, which was Teachers College. Wow. Well, so I went to SNE meetings, and by then I knew about Joan Gusso, who was becoming quite well known, in particular for the fact that she had testified that the advertising on television to children was very counter-nutritional. And so at meetings, people would say, "That's Joan Gusso, And I would look at her and I didn't dare to talk to her, just as some of you said about me. But some things happened, which is that it turns out that Joan was on the Food Day Advisory Committee as well. So she saw my name there. And at a particular SNE meeting, there was students who were dissatisfied with something. I don't remember what the issue was. And a Johnson College student had come with me. And being a Johnson student, she sort of organized the students in this protest. And Joan was at that meeting as well. So we had some conversation. But what really happened then was sometime later, she read this little article I had written about how to teach college students nutrition, how to be analytical skills, particularly how to analyze controversial issues in nutrition. The person who was teaching it tended to take an issue that was very about maybe saturated fat in the diet, what were some studies, pro and con, and that kind of stuff. But mine was more about issues that regular people had to decide on. And of course, very lots of action activities in class. So she decided that I was probably a good educator. So she wrote a letter to me asking me to apply for a position. That was in about March. You'd think that I would run and not walk to reply. Well, I had never written a CV before. And because I got to Johnston with a very indirect route. I was also dating someone. So it took me a while to sort of get it together. And finally, about May, I wrote her back and said, well, you probably filled the position already, but here it is. So apparently she liked what I wrote well enough to say that I should come for an interview. So in July, I fly to New York City. And I said, well, at least it's a free trip to New York City, and which I'd never been to before, even if I don't get the job. And I went through the search committee. I still remember the names of all the people on the search committee, and who grilled me about my research, which I didn't have much of, actually. So she offered me the job. I felt I had to give Johnston College a bit of notice. So I came in January in a snowstorm. You know, back then we had snowstorms, a foot of snow. And here I come in my California, I didn't even own a coat. And in my shoes, I didn't even have boots. Boots, what are those? So here I arrived, but what a program, what a team that I came to. Joan Gusso, which was our intrepid leader, who was our intellectual leader, as well as an innovative educator. And it seemed like there was a beehive of activity. We had conferences every semester, it seemed. Lots of activities off campus. So Jeannie Singer and Peggy Ravitch Seymour were very busy organizing all that. Tess Nakamura, our secretary, was wonderful. Tony LaCorey, this is a more recent picture of you. I don't have one from back then. But she was also a key member of that team and doing a number of things, one of which was being sort of like the director of the Nutrition Education Resources Project, which provided resources to teachers. And can you believe that we would send movies to the teachers and they would send the movies back to be loaned to another teacher. And later, when I gradually moved into nutrition education, she and I taught that course for several years together. And the other person who was our very thoughtful Jan Dodds. She was more involved in the public health aspect of the nutrition program. And I remember that one semester, she had to place 25 students in public health settings. So we had this huge program. And Joan, of course, was the mentor. And then also, I have this photograph, and I believe is when Joan actually became the Mary Schwartz Rose Professor. And I wanted to point out this Aurea Pai, who had been a chair of the program before. In fact, she provided pretty much all the money that is in the Mary Schwartz Rose chair. Well, eventually Joan decided she did not want to be department chair anymore. And I became department chair. I took over her office and immediately sort of filled it from floor to ceiling with books, and as you can see. So that sort of leads me to my current colleague. Well, I keep learning all the time. And I wanted to show a picture of Joan and her 90th birthday, because it was great at that time to see so many of the people from that early era as well. And I want to point out that Gail Feenstra, who is here, was my first research assistant on my first research project in New York City. And it was in PS 75, for those of you who know about that. And I can see Diane Hastings and John Heiser. They were, among others, research assistants in my first NIH grant. I keep learning from the research projects that we do, from my master's degree students, from our doctoral students. And as I said, the field was, education was becoming quite an important field. So I gradually moved over to nutrition education. I want to thank, of course, my wonderful colleagues. They are amazing, intellectually, professionally, and personally. The program aims to provide a broad view of the field, as well as the competencies that are needed to practice, which suits my background perfectly. And of course, in addition, it also strives to ensure that every voice is heard. It also honors mutual respect and responsibility. And it also seeks to approach all people with respect and acceptance. So that leads me to think about my journey continues. It has not ended. I do want to then also have a few closing thoughts. One of which is that as I reflect on all of this, that the underlying theme and purpose in my life has been based on a Christian one. I hesitate to say this, given the happenings in the Catholic Church, the evangelicals in quotes, and the injustices perpetrated by many who claim to be Christian. But churches are human organizations made up of flawed human beings. The original Jesus movement, though, was really about freedom and liberation and social justice. When asked to live one's life, how to live one's life, Jesus is quoted as saying, "Love God with all your heart, soul, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." That is, he advocated a life with a spiritual dimension and a social justice dimension. And this is probably not unique. but he spoke truth to power, and he worked with the marginalized people of his time, focusing on empowerment. He believed that we can make a difference, make a difference in society, noting that the mustard seed, which is one of the smallest seeds, can grow into a large 20 to 30-foot bush, which even the birds can nest, and how a little bit of leavening put into dough can create this can come to an enormous size. So we can make a difference and create a liberated and just society. Of course, we do not do this work alone. We do this work with others. I have attempted to do my bit. We all have many layers of ourselves as we move through life, each being enriched by the experiences of many other people and events. Indeed, it has been said, our experiences are less important than the people we experience them with. I am so grateful to all of you who have contributed to who I am personally and as a nutrition educator. I hope yet to have a few more layers to my life, and I wish everyone many interesting layers in your lives as well. So I look forward to talking more with you. Okay. I'm thrilled to be with all of you. Yes.
Yay!
Yay!
Oh, that was wonderful, Isobel. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for giving us this peek into your incredible life, and really just for letting all of us learn from your reflections. Before we have Q&A with Isobel, we have a little surprise for you, Isobel. When everybody registered for this event, we asked them to share their favorite memory with you. And Pam's son put a little video together, and we want to share that now. We can only include memories that we received up to Wednesday, and some were cut a little bit short for the video, but you'll get all of them in full after tonight.
Wow, 30 seconds to select reasons why I love Isobel after 30 years together. But I would have to say her boundless energy and her encouraging manner to get me out the door at this stage of life to do some walking or running or other physical activity is very gratifying. And I always feel great after we finish a nice walk or a nice run. And to watch her move and see her capacity for staying fit is very gratifying.
I remember those, yes. From the 60s. Oh, I remember that, Barbara. I was just getting started, yes. Hi, Jane. Little person.
Hi, Isabel. It's your friend Donna from California. And I only have a few seconds to tell you how much I love you and wish you all the best with your beginning of retirement, the end of your great time at Columbia. All the work you've done, all the research, all the friends you've made, the books you've written, and the memories of our times together since 1965. Skiing, talking, walking. See you soon.
Wow. Oh, our trip to Argentina. Thank you, Bernie. Oh, you're so Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Sharon.
Hi, Isobel. Congratulations on your retirement after 30 plus years at Columbia.
We love spending time with you and Bob. Thank you for making the holidays so special. We love your roast and potatoes.
Thank you for always taking such an interest in Ian and I.
And thank you just for being such a great grandma.
We love
We
you.
love you.
Love you.
Wow, that is amazing. I really appreciate what all of you have put together. This is really astonishing. I did not expect that. I'm sort of bowled over. You know,
She's a nice lady.
you try to do the best you can, but I can certainly. But anyway, I appreciate all that you've said. It's wonderful. And it's wonderful to see so many of you. I don't know whether there are questions or not, but I do realize that there was one slide that I'm not sure. I want to go back to, if I can just take 1 minute to do that, which is that I'm not sure I spent enough time on this one, which is that I want to thank all my colleagues. Not all of you know, that's Pam Cook, Randy Wolf, you all know Joan, Shelley Mesnick, who teaches our counseling course, Laura Sporney, and Jennifer Hillner, our nutrition dietetic internship director. And I want to draw special attention to Pam Cook, with whom I have worked for 20 to 30 years, and who has been an inspiration for me in my understanding of nutrition education. So thank you to all my colleagues.
Oh, well, thank you, Isobel. Yes, yay. So we have a few minutes to do questions, and either you can.
I want to make one more comment, which is to Joan, Joan Gusso. As you know, Joan, I have thanked you probably 2 or 3 times every year for the last dozen years.
Long after I deserved it.
For taking the risk on me, whom you didn't know, this crazy maverick background, and you were willing to hire me. And I have been eternally grateful, because this has been a wonderful place for me, because I think it sort of continues from my experience at Johnston, and you've been a terrific leader to set the tone for the whole department, for the whole program. Thank you.
Well, Isobel, thank you. And I certainly made a good choice when I asked you to come. That was that you can give me credit for asking you to come.
Yeah.
It changed the course of the program for sure. So thank you, Joan, and thank you, Isobel. And so if you have a question, you can either write it in the chat and I can share it with everyone, or you could just unmute yourself and ask the question. And I know a few of you have asked about the recording. This is being recorded, and we will share the recording with everybody who registered for the event. So you can definitely see the recording, and of course it could be shared, because Isobel, this was really, really just amazing. So I'm looking in, I don't see any in the chat. Well, I have a couple of questions. And you talked a little bit about this, but could you talk a little bit more about your experiences at Berkeley during the free speech movement and your experiences of Johnston College? How do they influence who you are as a professor today?
Yes, can you call me and see my phone?
Good question. I mean, I think prior to that, of course, I had been used to being lectured to. And so there was, and I mean, I had done a certain amount of that, and I think I was sort of good at that. But what it did, first of all, was to make me a much more open person, to recognize that, as we said, to try to be the way the Johnston experience was, which is to really hear people out, to be accepting of people, to provide respect, and also to recognizing there's also responsibility on both our sides. And I think that Berkeley was just that. Prior to that was very prim and proper, you know, missionary background, Scottish, being very strict.
Dower.
It sort of opened it up. So, which made me much more open to people as a faculty member.
That's great.
I'm comfortable with everybody making a decision, and I'm comfortable with sharing power with people. I feel that everything is a collective enterprise. So I love our faculty meetings. I think we all, very collaboratively talk with each other. Our doctoral seminar, not just me, all of us are very collaborative with everybody. And that's all the things that I think Berkeley and Johnston made it possible for me to be like that.
No, that's great. And that's why you wanted this to be stories of your life. So we have a question. Many people talked about your physical activity. So how did you become so physically active, and what keeps you motivated?
That's a very good question. Well, when you were, in Singapore, etc., nobody really, it's too hot, and then nobody thought about physical activity. So I think it only came much later when I was actually at Johnston. And I saw other people being physically active. My father was always very physically active, not necessarily running around, but he didn't walk places, he ran places. So I was always had this model of being active. So ever since Johnston in the 70s, I've been running, ever since probably 74, 75. What motivates me? Well, it's both the carrot and the stick. The carrot is I feel better. I really do afterwards, especially with all these Zoom calls, for hour after hour, you sort of sit on your chair, you're hunched over. I'm sure I've become hunched over since then. So it's good. And the stick is that everybody in my family has died of a heart attack. So that's likely to be my fate. So I'm trying to postpone it as long as possible. So that's the stick.
Very, very good. Well, another question related to that is, have you ever participated in a race?
In a race? Oh, yes. Quite a few races.
Bob is left.
A lot of 10K, which is 5 miles.
6.2.
That's 6.2. The two that I probably would be most interested. One was a 10 mile. That's the farthest I've ever run. So I'm not a big runner, really. And that was the two of us, my husband and myself, and it was a joint time between the two of us. Boy, that was hard work, doing 10 miles through the Central Park, up and down the hills, etc. Another one was also in Central Park for my age group. By then I was in my 50s, I think. I came in third, and I was so inspired that the next time I went, I sort of, really tried to keep up, and I think I came in second. But other than that, it's more for the fun of it. My husband was a runner and ran 4 marathons, so he was an inspiration as well. Only more recently, he hasn't been running as much as I have.
I think when you first came, Isobel, when you first came to New York, I think I was really pissed at you for something because you were doing a marathon and it interfered with something else. Wasn't that true? When you first came to this?
Did I do a marathon?
I think you were doing a marathon.
No, I've never done a marathon.
Oh, really? Okay, well.
No, truthfully, I think it's an unphysiologic distance. I think that's too far for any human being to have to run.
In one day. And I think Barbara has a question. Barbara Storper?
Yes, I do.
Yay.
It might be too heavy, but Isobel, I just wondered if you'd want to talk about how the profession has changed since when you started and where it is now. I know that when I started, Joan Gussow and you were considered kind of renegades at SNEP. And now when you look at everything, it looks like the whole profession is just, very different. And I think a lot of it has to do with you guys, TC and you guys. So can you talk about that and inspire us to do even more, especially with Trump still not leaving that White House? Anyway.
Well, part of it in the environmental part, of course, Joan is the one who's was forward thinking, and the world has sort of caught up with her finally. In the nutrition education area, I think it's partly the Johnston College experience, which was that obviously that emotions and feelings are very important. And that our growth and development, because we talk about that a lot at Johnston College, we had these we had these encounter groups, maybe you've heard of them, encounter groups. And I should say that the encounter groups continued for the next 5 years or so. So our classes were Monday, Thursday, Tuesday, Friday, and on Wednesday mornings, we had our encounter groups. Everybody was in a group, faculty and students together. And then in the afternoon, we had a community meeting. I think it made me much more aware that therefore nutrition education was not just about information.
Responsibility.
And in fact, Joan said something like that one time. She said, you know, we think of nutrition education as taking nutrition science information and making it ever more simple depending on the audience. And it's not the case, of course, which is that it involves changing patterns of behavior that we have developed over 20, 30 years. And we're telling people after 2 sessions, hey, change your life, which it doesn't work. But I think the thing to do is to do good work, publish it, and so that people trust what it is that you say about how you can help to change the world, change nutrition education. I should also say, and I think, Barbara, you and I have talked about it, that the nutrition education textbook started out 15 years before. And it's just that the field was so complicated, I couldn't figure out what to do with it.
It's 8:30.
And it was only one time when it finally dawned on me, oh, maybe it could all be done in 3 major areas. We help to motivate people, we facilitate change, and we provide environmental supports. And only then it sort of fell into place and I could write the book. But I had many versions of the book. I mean, I don't think anybody here was, oh, Diane Hastings might have helped me with various versions of the book, which all had to be tossed because, you know, it takes a while. So I think I would encourage everybody just to keep doing good work and trying to do our bit. It all adds up.
Thank you. We have one, okay, thank you, Barbara. We have one final question. Given your life's experience, how do you think we could do consensus building today when there's so much division?
Oh, at the country? Oh boy, I'm not sure anybody knows quite how to do that.
This is a good question.
I mean, I think it is important to realize that we have gone through something not dissimilar to what people did in Singapore and other places, trying to decide what was a good model for governance. And I think the important thing is that 50% of the country thinks that their vision is the right one, and the other one absolutely feels that theirs is the right one. So I think we have to do some listening and not demonize both sides, either side, and to really truly listen and try to understand where each side might have a point and to use that as a starting point to build a consensus. It's not going to be easy. Not going to be easy.
Let's give Isobel another big hand. Everybody maybe can unmute.
Yay! Thank you. Thank you.